something had shifted the moment his father pushed back from the table and stood up. Not fast, not dramatic, just slow, the way people move when their legs haven't quite caught up with what their brain just processed. He looked at me like he was trying to reconcile two completely different people. The woman who had been sitting across from him for the past 2 hours, and the name he had just read on the card in his hand. Chief Justice, Federal Court of Appeals. That was the phrase still working its way through his expression, and mine, in a different way. But I'm getting ahead of myself, because that moment, the standing up, the silence, the refrigerator hum filling the room, that came later. It came after the drive-through suburb streets I didn't recognize, after the handshake at the front door, after the first comments that landed so lightly I almost let them go. Before any of that, I was just a woman in a gray blazer, carrying a bottle of Cabernet, trying to remember if I should have brought flowers instead. My boyfriend had always known I was a judge. That part wasn't hidden. I told him early. Third date, pasta place near the courthouse, somewhere between the breadbasket and the entree. He nodded, asked a few questions, and then we talked about something else entirely. That was one of the things I loved about him. He didn't make it a thing. What he didn't fully understand, and what I never corrected, was the scope of it. He knew I wore a robe. He knew I worked long hours. He knew I worked long hours. He knew I sometimes came home with headaches that sat behind my eyes for days, the kind that came from writing opinions on cases that would set precedent for years. What he didn't know was that my opinions had been cited in 17 states, that I'd been appointed at 31, that I was, according to a profile in a legal journal I never read out loud in his presence, one of the most consequential federal appellate judges in the country. Not because I was hiding it, but because I didn't want that to be what he saw when he looked at me. I had spent years in courtrooms where my title walked in before I did. Attorneys adjusted their arguments mid-sentence when they found out which judge they were arguing in front of. Law clerks got nervous. Senior partners at firms that had known me for a decade suddenly started emailing instead of calling. The title changed everything, and I was tired of everything changing. When I met him, I was in line at a farmer's market on a Saturday morning in jeans and a flannel shirt, holding a canvas bag with a broken handle. He was standing behind me, also holding a canvas bag, also broken, different handle, and we had a 5-minute conversation about whether the heirloom tomatoes were actually worth the markup. That was it. That was the beginning. He knew I worked in law. I told him I was a judge. He asked if that was stressful. I said sometimes. He moved on. By the time he asked me to meet his parents, we had been together for almost 2 years. I had heard about them in pieces. His father, a retired general contractor who had built his own business from nothing, deeply proud of that, rightfully so. His mother, warm and church-going, the kind of woman who made her opinions known through loaded silences and carefully timed sighs. They had raised him in a medium-sized town in Ohio, the kind of place where your reputation preceded you and everybody knew which family you came from. He thought they would like me. I thought they probably would too. What I wanted to know, the question I didn't say out loud, was how they would treat me before they had a reason to. The drive was about 90 minutes. He talked the whole way, filling me in on family dynamics I would need to navigate. His aunt, who would probably ask about children within the first 10 minutes, his father's particular sensitivity about the fact that his son had moved to the city instead of staying to take over the business, his mother's habit of redecorating the dining room every 2 years and mentioning it unprompted. I listened and watched the highway flatten out into the kind of landscape that reminded me of places I grew up near, but never quite from. Strip malls giving way to subdivisions, giving way to something a little older, a little more settled. Trees that had been there longer than the houses around them. We pulled into the driveway just before 6. The house was a colonial with navy shutters, a wraparound porch, and a wind chime by the door that was working hard in a light November breeze. A basketball hoop at the end of the driveway, orange and slightly rusted, the kind that comes from years of actual use. Window boxes with the last of the fall mums, browning at the edges but still hanging on. His mother opened the front door before we reached it. She had the kind of smile that arrived immediately and stayed steady throughout, the sort that came from genuine warmth even when accompanied by a certain amount of scrutiny. She hugged him first, then me, quick and firm. His father came from the hallway behind her, big handshake, the kind that was also an assessment. He looked at me once, measured something and nodded. "So this is the lawyer," he said. "Judge, actually," his son said. His father nodded again. "Right, same thing, more or less." I smiled. He wasn't being dismissive. He just didn't know the difference. That was fine. The living room had the particular warmth of a house that had been lived in for 30 years by people who weren't trying to impress anyone. Family photos in mismatched frames, a sectional that had been reupholstered at least once, a large television, a shelf of Reader's Digest condensed books next to a shelf of sports trophies, small ones, the kind kids win for participation as much as achievement, the kind parents keep forever. His mother offered me a seat on the good side of the sectional, the one facing the room. Small kindness, I noticed. We did the usual first 20 minutes, the drive, the traffic, how work was going for everyone, whether the weather had been weird lately. It had everywhere for years. His mother brought out a charcuterie board with a slightly apologetic look, as though she wasn't sure if it was the right thing to serve. It was perfectly fine. I told her so and meant it. Then his father leaned back in his recliner and looked at me with the comfortable directness of a man in his own home. "So, what kind of law do you do?" "Federal appellate," I said. He processed this. "That's the appeals court? When people don't like the verdict?" "Roughly, yes." "So you're like the second opinion?" "More or less." He nodded, satisfied. "Good work if you can get it. Stable, I imagine. Good pension." "Dad," his son said, a small warning in his voice. "What?" "I'm asking about her career." "That's what you do." His mother, from the kitchen doorway, "We're very happy he found someone professional, someone settled." She meant it as a compliment. I understood that, but there was something embedded in it, settled, as opposed to what he had brought home before, I gathered. That placed me in a category I wasn't sure I recognized. "How long have you been practicing?" his father asked. "I don't practice anymore. I'm on the bench." Right. He picked up a cracker. "So you hear cases all day. That must get repetitive." "It can vary. I imagine it's mostly paperwork, though. At that level." His son looked at me. I looked at the cracker on my plate. "There's some of that," I said. Dinner was pot roast, which was excellent. His mother had clearly spent the day on it, and it showed. I told her so genuinely, twice. She seemed pleased in the way that people are pleased when they suspect you might mean it. We sat at a round table in the dining room, his father at what was clearly his usual seat, his mother moving between the table and the kitchen, waving off offers to help, then accepting them, then waving them off again. Conversation moved through the standard territory. His brother's new job, a cousin's recent wedding, the neighbor who had finally sold the house and what that meant for property values in the development. I listened, asked questions when it felt right, and watched. About 40 minutes in, his mother asked me something that landed differently than the rest. "Do you think you'll want to slow down once you two start a family?" His son started to say something. I put my hand briefly on his arm. "I haven't really thought about it in those terms," I said. Of course. She passed the bread. "It's just that it's a lot to manage. My sister-in-law was a nurse, worked all through her kids' early years, and she always said she wished she'd stepped back sooner." I nodded. "I understand the feeling. Do you enjoy it? The work, I mean." She asked this with genuine curiosity, not challenge. "I do. Very much." "Well," she said, "that's the important thing, I suppose." His father had been quiet for a moment, working through something. Then, "What exactly is your salary situation, if you don't mind me asking?" "Ballpark." "Dad." His son, more firmly this time. Ballpark? Dad. His son, more firmly this time. It's a fair question. You're talking about a future together. These things matter. I looked at his father directly. Federal judges have a set salary. It's public information. Roughly $220,000 a year. Silence. Not long, but noticeable. His mother, oh well, that's very comfortable. His father, a pause. That's more than I expected, honestly. Federal judicial salaries haven't kept pace with private sector law, I said, which was true, and also the kind of thing I said automatically in certain contexts, almost without thinking. His father looked at me more carefully now. You seem to know a lot about how it works. I've been in it for a while. How long? I was appointed 9 years ago. He did the math. You were, 26, 31. He stopped chewing for a moment. That's young, he said. I've been told. His son was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read, something between recognition and a question he hadn't yet formed. After dinner, his mother cleared the plates and brought out pie, apple, from scratch, with a lattice crust. I told her it was genuinely the best I'd had outside of my grandmother's kitchen, and I watched something relax in her shoulders. His father refilled his coffee and sat back down with the comfortable authority of a man ready to settle into the evening. So, he said, what's the biggest case you've ever handled? I can't discuss active cases. Old ones, I considered. There was a clean air regulation case a few years ago. Multi-state industrial emissions. The ruling affected federal environmental enforcement policy. He tilted his head. That sounds significant. It was. Were you the one who wrote the, what do you call it? The opinion. And yes, he was quiet for a moment. Then? I'm not sure I knew appellate court judges did things that mattered that much. Most people don't, I said. It's not a very visible job. His son had his phone in his hand now, screen tilted slightly toward the table. His father looked at me with a different quality of attention than he'd had all evening. What's your full name again? Your professional name. I told him. He looked at his son. His son put the phone down on the table, screen up, and slid it slightly toward his father. I didn't need to see what was on it. I'd seen my own search results. His father read the screen, then read it again, then looked at me, then looked at me. Then, slowly, he stood up. 10 seconds of nobody saying anything is longer than most people think it is. I counted them, not on purpose, just because the room was quiet enough that I noticed each one. The apple pie sitting untouched, the coffee going slightly cold, the wind chime outside working through a gust. His son was the first to speak. He gestured at the phone. That profile, that's you. Yes. The law review article. The one that got cited in the Supreme Court brief. That one too. His mother from across the table quietly. I didn't realize. I mean, when he said judge, I thought most people imagine something more local, I said. That's fine. His father was still standing. He looked like a man who was revising something in real time and not entirely comfortable with what the revision was revealing about himself. I owe you an apology, he said. For what specifically? He almost smiled, but it didn't quite arrive. For the pension comment. That's a small one, I said, not unkindly. He sat back down. The salary question, I nodded. And for... He rubbed the back of his neck. I implied your work was mostly paperwork. You did. His mother folded her hands on the table. She was working through something too, but with a different energy than her husband. Less revision, more discomfort. The kind that comes from realizing a question you asked. The slowdown when you start a family question would have been framed entirely differently with different information. His son reached for my hand under the table, instinctively the way he always did. Why didn't you tell us? His mother asked. Genuinely, not accusingly. I thought about how to answer that. The true answer was complicated enough that I had to pick a version of it. Because I wanted to see who you were before you knew what to think of me, I said. No one had a response to that immediately. His father looked at his son. His son looked at me. I didn't know either, his son said quietly. Not the full picture. You never asked for the full picture, I said. You just asked if it made me happy. He nodded slowly. Did that bother you? That I didn't ask more? No, I said. It was one of the things I liked most about you. The drive home was quiet for the first 20 minutes. Not uncomfortable, just full. He drove the way he always did when he was thinking. Hands a little higher on the wheel than usual, eyes on the road with more focus than the highway actually required. I should have told them more, he said finally. You told them what you knew. I knew you were. He paused. I knew you were significant. I just didn't have the language for it. Significant is an interesting word. What would you use? I thought about it. Just a person with a specific job. He glanced at me. That's not what the search results say. The search results don't know what I have for breakfast. He almost laughed. Fair. We drove another few miles. My dad looked embarrassed, he said. He should, a little. But embarrassment isn't the point. What is? I watched the highway lights pass. I'll know when I see if anything actually changes. The changes came in small waves, the way they usually do when people are trying. His mother called 3 days later, not to invite me somewhere, not with an agenda, just to say she had looked up the environmental case I'd mentioned, had read about the ruling and wanted to tell me she thought it mattered. I appreciated that. His father was harder. He was the kind of man whose respect, once reconfigured, expressed itself through formality rather than warmth. Pulling out chairs, asking my opinion on news stories he had clearly researched before bringing up, using a careful tone that felt like a second language he was working hard at. There was one lunch, just the two of us, at a barbecue place he liked near their house. Wino booths, laminated menus, sweet tea in mason jars. He arrived early and waited. He talked about his business for a while, projects he was proud of, one he wasn't. A bridge he'd consulted on in the 90s that he mentioned with a specific kind of satisfaction. I listened. He was good at what he did. He had built something real, and he knew it. Then he said, I think I've treated people the way I thought they ranked. I didn't say anything. Not cruelly, he continued. But I've been polite to people I didn't think much of, and that's different from actually respecting them. That's a hard thing to admit. It's a harder thing to realize you've been doing it your whole life. He turned his tea glass in a slow circle. I didn't treat you badly at that dinner. No, but I didn't treat you like someone worth knowing. I let that sit there. No, I said, you didn't. He nodded. He wasn't asking for forgiveness. He was just putting it on the table between us, naming it clearly. I respected that more than a formal apology would have given me. The more complicated evolution was with his son. He was proud of me. That was clear. Maybe too clearly. He started mentioning my work in conversations in a way he never had before, introducing me at social things with a slight extra emphasis that I noticed and he probably didn't, telling a story about my job to people at a party in a way that turned me into a punchline of sorts, the impressive girlfriend, and then looking surprised when I was quiet in the car afterward. Did that bother you? He asked. A little. I was just, I don't know, proud. Pride is fine, I said, but you were introducing me like I was something you'd found. He was quiet. I'm not a credential, I said. I'm not something you carry around. I know that. Do you? He didn't answer right away, and the pause was honest enough to be useful. I think, he said slowly, that finding out the full scope of what you do made me feel, I don't know, like I needed to explain myself somehow to other people, like I needed them to understand why someone like you would be with someone like me. Someone like you, I repeated. I manage supply chain logistics, he said. For a mid-sized manufacturing company, it's not, I don't think about it like that. I know, but other people do. And now they know what you are, and they look at me a certain way. I looked at him in the low light of the car. How do they look at you? He was honest. Like they're trying to figure out what I did to deserve you. I turned back to the window. And when they thought I was just a local court judge, he thought about it. They looked at us like two people who made sense. Which version of that bothers you more? He didn't answer, but I could see him working on it. There was a family gathering at his cousin's house in March. Nothing formal, just a backyard cookout, plastic chairs, kids running between the adults, the particular noise of a large family that had been doing this for decades. He introduced me as his girlfriend. Nothing else. I wore jeans. No jewelry worth noting. A simple jacket. No clues. His relatives were friendly. They asked the usual questions. What do I do? I said I worked in law. Oh, a lawyer? More like administrative work, I said. They nodded and moved on. Someone mentioned they'd just hired a lawyer for a real estate thing, and had I ever done any of that? No, I said. Different area. They lost interest in the direction of the conversation and steered it somewhere else. He watched it all happen. On the drive home, he said, they didn't try to get to know you. No. Once they thought you were just, he searched for the word. Ordinary? Yeah, I know. He drummed his fingers on the steering wheel. Is that what it felt like at my parents' before? A version of it. He was quiet for a minute. Then, I think I've done that to people too. Most people have, I said, including me. He looked at me. You. I'm not immune to it. I've made assumptions. I've decided someone wasn't worth knowing because I looked at the surface of them and made a calculation. The difference is, I try to catch it now. Because you've been on the receiving end. Because I've been on both ends. Months passed, the way good months do. Without milestones, without drama. Just the accumulation of ordinary time. We cooked dinner. We argued about whether the apartment needed a second bookshelf. It did. I worked late on opinions. He brought home takeout without being asked on the nights he knew I'd worked through lunch. His parents came to visit in the summer. A weekend trip. He'd suggested it. I'd agreed. His mother and I walked through a farmer's market on Saturday morning, not the one where I'd met him, a different one, but similar. Heirloom tomatoes, overpriced honey, a table selling handmade quilts that neither of us needed and both of us considered. She said without much preamble, I've been thinking about what you said. About wanting to be treated like a person, before being treated like a position. I waited. I don't think I understood it at first, she continued, picking up a jar of preserves and turning it in her hands without really seeing it. I thought you meant we had been rude. You hadn't been. I know. That's what made it harder to understand. She set the jar down. But then I thought about when I was working, years ago, before the kids. I was an office manager, and I remember how people treated me, how they talked to me in the break room versus how they talked to me when they needed something from my desk. I looked at her. I remembered that feeling, she said. Invisible when you're not useful. That's close to it. She nodded. I'm sorry we made you feel that way. I don't think you meant to. No, she said. That's almost the whole problem, isn't it? I thought about that conversation for days afterward. The question underneath all of it, the one the dinner had been really asking, the one I hadn't quite been able to articulate at the time, wasn't about whether people would respect me after they knew. It was about whether anything would be left to respect if they didn't know. The answer I found wasn't comfortable. Politeness, yes. Pleasantness, yes. The smooth surface of a conversation where everyone knows the unspoken rules. But the particular quality of attention that makes a person feel seen, that had required information to unlock. And that meant, in a way that couldn't be undressed, that it had never really been about me. Which was not their fault exactly. We're all doing versions of this. We triage strangers constantly, deciding who is worth our full presence, who gets the polished version of our manners and who gets the real one. We tell ourselves we treat everyone the same. Almost none of us do. What the dinner had given me in the end was a question I couldn't unask. Who in my life had seen me clearly before they had a reason to? The answer was shorter than I expected. One evening, fairly ordinary, dishes done, some kind of documentary on the television neither of us was fully watching, he said, if you had actually been nobody, no title, no profile, no citations, do you think they would have liked you? I thought about it honestly. I think they would have found me fine, I said. Acceptable. Maybe slightly confusing. Not sure why their son was bringing home someone without obvious markers of the right kind of success. But not liked you? Not really. I don't know. Maybe eventually, if I'd been around long enough. He nodded slowly. Would that have been enough for you? I didn't answer right away, because the real answer had a weight to it. No, I said finally. He looked at his hands. Is this enough? What they're doing now? It's more honest than it was. That's not quite the same as yes. No, I agreed. It's not. He exhaled. I don't know how to fix that. You can't fix what they haven't broken, I said. You can only decide what you're building. He looked at me. With you. With me. The thing about respect that is earned by information is that it is always underneath conditional, which doesn't make it worthless. Conditional things can be genuine, but they can be revoked. The conditions can change, and once you know that the kindness directed toward you is contingent on something external, a title, an achievement, a number, you spend a certain amount of energy watching for when the conditions might shift. I didn't want that. I had spent years cultivating a version of myself that could walk into rooms without armor, that could sit at farmers' market tables and talk about tomatoes with strangers and be nobody interesting. Not because I was ashamed of the work, because the work was a part of me, not the whole of me. And I had learned, slowly and at some cost, that the people worth keeping were the ones who reached the whole of me before they'd been handed a roadmap. He was still learning how to be one of those people. I thought, genuinely, that he could. What changed in the months after the dinner wasn't dramatic. His parents didn't transform. They remained who they were, which was people shaped by a certain set of values about what constituted a successful life, who had begun, in their cautious and careful way, to question whether those values were the only ones. His father still talked about my work in terms of achievement. His mother still occasionally asked about slowing down in ways that assumed a particular future, but they were trying to hear what I said. That counted for something. His son was doing the harder work, the work of unlearning the part of himself that had absorbed the same values without knowing it, the part that had, the night of the dinner, stayed comfortable and called it respect for family dynamics. He was looking at that part of himself now and not looking away. That was, I knew, not nothing. One night, he said, I think I spent a long time thinking love was about finding someone impressive. And now? Now I think it's about finding someone you want to be honest with. I turned toward him on the couch. Are you honest with me? I'm trying to be more honest with myself, he said, which I think is the prerequisite. I thought that was right. We set a date for a small engagement party in the spring. His family, a handful of friends, a restaurant with a private room, and a menu I let his mother help choose because she wanted to contribute something, and it was a way to let her. At the party, his father made a short toast. He talked about his son the way fathers do, stories from childhood, pride that required no performance because it had been there long enough to simply be fact. And then he turned to me, and he said something I didn't expect. I've spent most of my life believing that the measure of a person was what they built, he said. A business, a family, a reputation. Something you could point to. I still believe that, partly. He paused. But I met someone this year who made me realize that the way you treat people when you don't know what they built, that might matter just as much. He raised his glass. I'm glad she didn't tell us, he said, even though it was uncomfortable, especially because it was uncomfortable. I raised my glass back. That was the first moment since the dinner that felt genuinely like the beginning of something real. If there's a lesson in any of this, and I'm suspicious of lessons that arrive too neatly, it's not about titles or careers or what it means to earn someone's respect. It's simpler than that and harder. Pay attention to who people are when they don't think anything is at stake, when they believe they're talking to someone ordinary, when there's no performance required, no impression to make, no hierarchy to navigate. That version of a person, the unguarded one, the one that emerges in the first 20 minutes of a dinner before anyone knows the full picture, that is the most honest thing you will ever see. Not the worst of them, not always, but the most true. And if you are lucky enough to be loved by someone who saw that unguarded version of you first, who reached for your hand before they understood the scope of what you carried, hold on to that. Not because titles don't matter, but because a love that doesn't require them is the rarer thing. That's what I was really looking for that November evening, carrying a bottle of wine up to a porch with a wind chime and a navy flag. Not revenge, not proof, just the truth of who I was walking into. I've thought about that dinner a lot since it happened. Not the reveal moment, not Robert standing up slowly from his chair, not the phone screen, not the silence that followed. I've thought about the 40 minutes before all of that. The easy, unguarded 40 minutes when they had no reason to perform respect, so they didn't. That's the part that stays with me. There's a version of this story where I walk away feeling vindicated, where the point is that I had power and they underestimated it, and then they found out and had to reckon with that. And I understand why people want that version. It's satisfying in a clean, simple way. But it was never the real story. The real story is what I learned about the distance between politeness and presence. Robert was never impolite to me that first evening. Margaret was warm. They offered me food. They included me in conversation. They followed the social contract in every visible way. What they didn't do, what they couldn't do, because they had already decided I wasn't worth the effort, was actually pay attention. And there is a difference between being included and being seen. A significant one. I had spent enough years on the bench to know that most people never notice it until they've been on the wrong side of it. What I also learned, and this one was less comfortable, was that I had done the same thing to others in quieter moments I hadn't examined closely. We all do. We walk into rooms and triage the people in them, deciding without deciding who is worth our full presence. We tell ourselves it's practical, that attention is finite, that we have to prioritize, and maybe that's partly true, but there's a difference between not having enough time and not being curious. Curiosity is a choice. The moment you stop being curious about a person, before you've earned the right to stop, you've already made a judgment that belongs to you, not to them. Daniel is still working on that. I think about it sometimes, watching him. He's a genuinely good person who absorbed a certain map of the world from people he loved and trusted, and the map told him that value was something you could measure from the outside. His father built that map. His town reinforced it. Years of it. It doesn't come undone in a single dinner, or a single honest conversation in a parking lot, or even a year of trying, but the willingness to look at the map and ask whether it's accurate, that's where change actually begins. That part I believe he has. Margaret surprised me most in the end. The walk through the farmers' markets. The way she connected it to our own experience of being invisible at work 20 years ago. That took something. It's harder to say I recognize what I did because I felt it too, than it is to simply apologize. Apologies can be performed. Recognition requires something real underneath it. I don't think intelligence protects you from this. I don't think success does either. The people who treat others well consistently, not just when there's something at stake, not just when they're being watched, are the ones who have trained themselves to stay curious past the point where it's easy, who have decided, deliberately, that the person in front of them is worth the full version of their attention until that person gives them a reason to think otherwise. That's not a gift. It's a practice. And it is, I think, one of the more honest measures of who someone actually is. The unguarded 40 minutes told me more about that family than anything that came after, and I am glad I went looking for it, even if what I found was harder than I expected. That's what I was really carrying out of that house. Not proof, not a lesson delivered neatly at the end, just a cleaner understanding of what I need from the people I choose to be close to, and a quieter commitment to earning that same standard myself.